Thank you, Simeon, for the kind words. And thank you, Yorgo, for the introduction. I think we had planned those the other way around, but thank you for introducing me. And thank you all for being here today. I think we're very privileged as an organization to be here today, to be here at the Harvard Kennedy School. As George said, we are a think tank, and what we do is we produce public policy work. So to be able to share some of our work at one of the leading public policy universities on the planet is truly an honor. So I'm very grateful for the invitation. And thank you very much. And I think Simeon also mentioned something else that's very important for the context, that we're here in Boston. And a lot of us came to Boston because it's the academic capital of the planet. And we have an incredible Greek academic diaspora here. So I'm very excited to be having this conversation here today. And we'll also have a conversation at the panel later with some of the academics who can share some of their insights, having been a member of the Greek academic diaspora. So I'll start with telling you what we have done. What we did was we combined two of the focus sectors of the organization. We combined higher education and the Greek diaspora to create what is the first ever Greek Academic Diaspora Survey. I worked on this with Korina Anagnostopoulou. Simeon already said all of the nice things, so I don't have to repeat them. But we worked on this for a very long time. And the reason why we wanted to do this is twofold. On the one hand, we know that higher education in Greece is changing. There's been many reforms in public universities over the past 15 years aimed at improving the quality of those universities. And in parallel, there was a recent legislation to introduce some forms of non-public universities in Greece. The other thing that is happening is that Greeks living abroad are starting to move back. So I think most people in the room will know that approximately 500,000 people left during the crisis. In a country of 10 million, that's a very big number, particularly when you take into account that these are very highly educated people. Now, as the economy is rebounding, some people are starting to move back, yet we don't really see that in academia, or we don't even know if that's happening in academia. So that was another driver for doing this survey. So effectively, we designed a research question to kind of understand how the Greek academic diaspora feels about these changes. So our research question was, are Greek academics abroad interested in moving to Greece to work in higher education? In order for us to be able to actually answer this question, we needed to know who is the Greek academic diaspora. No one really knows where they are, how many they are, who they are. So we had to figure that out. So we started by actually documenting all of the academics in 84 leading universities, including Harvard, by the way, obviously, in 15 different countries around the world. And here, before I even get into the actual results of the survey, we have our first major finding, which is that we found over 3,500 Greek academics. On an absolute value, this is a very large number. And even percentage-wise, it's very, very significant. It's 1% to 3% of the academic staff in most of the universities that we looked at. And we also know from previous research that Greece is second only to Israel in terms of academics per capita. So what we learned, even before we look into the results of the study itself, is that we have this incredible intellectual capital that we can use as a country. After we identified all of these people, we reached out to them and we asked them if they're interested in participating in our survey. We were trying to understand if they would be interested in moving back to Greece. And if you do surveys for a living, you would know that the expected response rate is somewhere between 5 to 7%. What that would have meant somewhere between 200 and 250 people, 250 responses. We actually got 500 responses. So that's double what we were expecting. And the way we are interpreting this result is that irrespective of whether or not they're interested in moving back, they at least want to have this conversation. They want to tell us why they're moving back or why not, and what they think about Greek higher education and how to fix it. So the survey had 27 questions. I think maybe a few people in this room might have answered it. I'm not going to go through all of the responses, but the data is all available online. But I want to start with a few of the things that we learned in terms of the demographic characteristics of the diaspora, because it has never been studied. So we don't really know. We know anecdotally who they are, but we don't really know who they are. And the first question we asked people is, what is your connection to Greece? And here, everyone in our sample had either Greek citizenship, Greek ancestry, or both. But what is interesting about this is that 16% said that they have Greek ancestry, but they don't have citizenship. In places like the United States, Canada or Australia, that number is way higher. It's closer to 25 to 30%, as I think a lot of you know, given like the number of Greek Americans, or yes, Greek Americans that you meet here. And I think this is a very important thing to highlight, because many times when we talk about brain regain, we tend to focus on the crisis generation, and this is probably my generation, but that's not the only people that are out there. There's other people, a non-trivial amount of people that are out there and are interested in having these discussions and are interested in moving back. The second thing I want to highlight has to do with, what types of academic positions do they have? We cast a very wide net. We wanted to capture input from as many people as possible, starting, from the academics to be the PhD students all the way to professor, and there's a few professor emeritus and other as well. But I think what's interesting to observe here is just the sheer percentage of professors that we have in our sample. This kind of makes sense if you think about it age-wise, but I think why this is important is because this is a huge asset for the country, right? We're talking about people who have spent their whole academic careers on something very specific, and they work in some of the best universities in the world, which makes them probably leading academics in their field globally. And this is intellectual capital that our country has and can tap into at any point in time. And this is actually what we do as an organization. We leverage all of these people as much as we can, and everyone's very open, and I'm very grateful for that. And the last thing I kind of want to mention is what departments are they in? What are their academics focused on? I think a lot of you might know this, but Greeks tend to focus a lot on STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. More than half of the people in our sample are actually in STEM. And then when you kind of double click on the departments that they're in, well, you have a very high number. A very high number of engineers, your civil engineers, your mechanical engineers, your environmental, like me. But then we separated out the electrical and computer engineers, because there was a very large number. These tend to be slightly older people, but then people shift and become younger in informatics and computer science. And the reason why this is exciting, I think those of you who follow Greek public discourse, you'll know that there's been a lot of talk about the Greek AI scientists. These are all in here. And what's exciting about this is that they're very young, which means that they're academics in their eyes, and there's people who are building their career, a lot of them on AI. So again, this is a very big asset for the country. And now to the big reveal. I think you gave it away, but it's okay. The question that we asked is, would you consider working at a university in Greece in the next 5 years? And the response that we got was 59% of the people who responded to the survey said yes. And on a percentage-wise, that's a large number. Of course, the results might be biased because we had people opt into the survey, right? So we don't know how they feel about Greece. Nonetheless, it's a very large absolute number. Our sample is 500 people, so this is more than 250 people that are interested in moving back in the next 5 years. And this is not a trivial amount. We then looked into who's most likely to be interested in returning. And I'll start with dispelling a few myths here in the middle. Very frequently, when I tell people about this survey, they tell me, well, it's only the older people who want to move back. Well, that's not true. Our data shows that people aged 35 to 40, 36 to 45 are neither more nor less likely to be interested in moving. The second thing I typically hear is that those who have children might be less interested in moving because they're settled in their lives. That's also not true. Again, it's as likely as the mean to move. And the last thing is that those who are in relationships and foreigners might not be interested in moving back. Only Greeks want to live in Greece. Well, again, that's not true. What we saw with this group was that they are slightly concerned about, the potential for their spouse to get a job or how their spouse is going to perceive since they're going to be a foreigner, but that's not discouraging them from wanting to move back. Now, looking at the good news, who's more likely to be interested in moving? Well, number one is doctors, which is why we've invited a doctor to speak to us later today. 78% of doctors said that they want to move back. That is a very, very high number. The majority of these doctors are based in the United States, have done either their medical degree or their residency here. And this has a very direct policy implication. At the end of the day, we are a think tank. We try to think about how to improve things. And the direct policy implication here is how do we make it easier for them to move back? And this is something that our organization is already working on, because it's very important for them to have a very streamlined process. If you're a doctor in the United States and you want to move back to Greece, the level of bureaucracy you have to go through to be able to move back is very high, and it's a higher bar than what it is in Europe. So we're trying to standardize it and level the playing field for doctors in the United States. The other thing that we saw was that those who live very far away want to move back more than the rest. So Canada and Australia. One of the interesting things here is that people in Canada and Australia tend to have a higher percentage of second generation and third generation Greeks. So I don't know to what extent they're fully attuned to Greek reality and how much they've managed their expectations for what will happen if they were to move back. And the last thing which is expected is small research budgets. But the reason why I am highlighting this is because this unlocks a few demographics. It unlocks a few departments: social sciences, humanities, law, business. And it also unlocks a few academic positions, like lecturers, who typically have smaller research budgets. Then, in terms of who's less likely to move, there's a very consistent pattern here. And the consistent pattern here is that this is the brain drain generation. The people who are living in Switzerland, Netherlands, or Sweden tend to be people who have recently moved into the country. They're very young. Majority of them have studied either undergrad or grad in Greece, and they tend to be in engineering departments. So this brain generation that has moved out of Greece and is now living in Europe is not interested in moving back. The silver lining, I guess, in this data is that if you double click on this, what you see is that people who are professors in engineering and computer science and the likes are more likely to be interested than the younger people. So at least, in these departments, you have people with tenure and experience who would be interested in moving back. The very big question that I always get when I tell people about this study is, what is the expected salary? Because a lot of people think that if you weren't going to move back, your salary expectations are not going to match reality. And our data doesn't show that. It actually shows the opposite. Our data shows that approximately 30% of people would be happy with a salary of less than 2,500 euros a month, pre-tax, mikta, as we say in Greece. And these are salaries that currently exist in Greece. This is 1,500 euros a month is the entry-level salary for a Greek academic. Someone with tenure is making this. So these salaries reflect current market conditions, and this is very, very good news. Then we saw that 32% of people want a salary of 4,000 euros. This 4,000 euros number isn't a random number. It's approximately an average salary of an academic in Europe, and this is what we wanted to calibrate to. And this is slightly above what is currently offered in the Greek academic system. If you have many years of tenure, you can earn a salary of approximately 3,000 euros a month. You get some other sources of income, other benefits that potentially could add up to 4,000, and many Greek academics have other sources of income, like from consulting or from grants. So it could add up to 4,000, but it's not your salary. So this is slightly above reality, but again, it's not that far. Obviously, you had people who wanted more money. Here, the patterns that we observed are exactly what you expect. The higher the standard of living of the country that you're currently living in, the higher your salary expectations, and the higher your the more years of experience you have, the higher your salary expectations you have. But nonetheless, this is a positive message. It's salaries are not necessarily the major issue. We then also asked people, what types of position would you want to have if you were to move back? And the reason we ask this is because very frequently, when we have conversations about this topic, people expect that they will only move back for a few years and they don't want to move back and relocate permanently. But the data doesn't show that. The data shows that 52% of people want full-time positions in Greece. And what's actually more exciting about this is that this part of the data, they skew younger. So it's the younger people who want to start and build their careers in Greece. People who skew older tend to want visiting time positions or joint faculty or part-time. So there's a very nice balance here of younger people wanting to build their careers, and then older people still want to contribute, and there's still value in bringing people back even for short periods of time. One of the reasons why we did this survey was because there was a new law that was passed in terms of the non-public universities. And we kind of wanted to gauge the reaction of the Greek academic diaspora to this law. So we asked them, what type of university would you be most likely be interested to work in? And what we saw was that the majority of them prefer internationally acclaimed universities. What I mean by this is if Harvard, for example, were to establish a campus in Greece, 70% of them would prefer that. What is still encouraging, though, is that 58% say that they would likely work at a public university. And this is actually in line with the other responses that we saw in the survey. Greek academics abroad actually value the quality of public universities in Greece. They characterize the academic level of students and the academic level of professors as high. These are the positive things that they see in the Greek universities. And then there is a lot of red on this slide, a lot of negative things about universities in Greece, starting with compensation. Even though I'm not really sure to what extent this reflects reality, because if you saw the numbers, their salary expectations match reality. So I think this is an awareness issue and also a Greek complaining potentially issue. There are other challenges. A lot of the other challenges that we identified have to do with institutional issues within the universities, governance issues within the universities. And I think anyone who follows what's happening in Greek universities knows what these challenges are. University bureaucracy, meritocracy, and another big one has to do with career advancement and policies. What we saw is we asked this question for universities in Greece. We asked a very similar question for various factors in Greece. And what we saw is that the way that they perceive Greece in general and the universities, they don't align. On average, people say that the situation in Greece is fair. This is almost a normal distribution. So people just think that things are okay. Versus when you look at what they think of universities, it skews negative, poor to very poor. And those who don't want to return overwhelmingly rate the state of universities as very poor. So you can see that, and I think Simeon mentioned that things in Greece are getting better, and this is potentially reflected here. I don't know to what extent you can say that the same is true for universities. We then also asked people, why are you moving back? And we gave them a few factors to rank. And those who are moving back primarily for personal reasons, or social life and culture reasons, or climate. However, those who are not interested in moving back, they cite primarily things that have to do with the universities, like level of compensation we've already talked about, but political environment and bureaucracy, university policies and infrastructure, research and teaching requirements, and work culture. I think I've said a lot, but I want to just take a step back and kind of summarize. And because we are a think tank and we're very focused on impact, we always have policy recommendations for the work that we do. So I'll walk you through those as well. I think we did this survey because no one has studied the Greek academic diaspora, and we wanted to understand it better, and we wanted to see what people think about universities in Greece. And I think what we learned, I think one major takeaway is that the Greek academic diaspora is very, very large. It's very sizable, and it's very high quality. So this is an asset for the country, irrespective of whether people want to move back or not. The other thing is that academics are interested in engaging in these discussions about higher education in Greece, and we should be doing more of these. Greek academics skew towards STEM, but then I think the major thing is that they are actually interested in moving back. Some of the barriers, like the salary, is not necessarily a real barrier, but there's big changes that are required in public universities to actually drive people back. People perceive that the quality of the universities, primarily reflecting public universities, as high, and they are concerned about meritocracy and bureaucracy. But moving on to our recommendations, because we really wanted to use this data to make something out of it. And the very obvious recommendation is try to attract them back. I mean, people want to move back. Let's figure out what it takes to actually bringing them back. And so because we collected so much data, we've actually looked at what different demographics need and what's important for each of them, and we've outlined that in our report. And this could be very useful for creating a strategy on how to bring people back. I think the second thing is that in the meantime, right, there are existing tools that can help bring people back, like the visiting professors, like joint chairs, which are things that we've worked with administration on, and also named chairs. I think named chairs are an underutilized opportunity in Greek universities for whatever reasons we can discuss potentially, but they are completely underutilized, and I'm sure academics who work here are very, very aware of their potential. The other thing, I mentioned this a few times, that has to do with compensation. There is an awareness problem here. Increasing awareness about this is not that complicated. It could potentially change the minds of a few people about their decision. And the last thing, which I've already mentioned, but I think is important, is to streamline the process for doctors to move back, since so many of them want to move back, and it's something so simple. Sometimes we like to overcomplicate bureaucracy in Greece. In this case, we can simplify it. It will make a big difference. We also looked at things that have to do with improving higher education. We could spend hours talking about this. Many things have been said, but we really tried to figure out how to propose something that is potentially impactful and simple and easy to implement. And this is kind of where the rationale of all of these decisions came from. I think talking about increasing transparency in the hiring process, it's not that complicated. You can do it. And I think one of the challenges, and we saw, that is meritocracy, and it's about lack of transparency in the hiring and promotion processes. The other two things have to do with research. One of the challenges right now for a lot of Greek academics was the lack of research, and not just the lack of available funding, but also the frequency with which it's available and the visibility that they have into the future. So building a national research strategy, I think, is something that has been said many, many times. We're just repeating it and adding to it that now we have more data about the Greek academic diaspora. And this is something that should be an input into this strategy, because you know where you have capabilities around the world and what Greeks are good at, and that should be a factor in the way that you design that strategy. And together with the strategy, there should be a 5-year grant timeline so that everyone who's doing research knows when's the next time that they can apply for funding. And the last thing is that given the level of interest that we saw within the Greek academic diaspora in general in discussing this topic, I think there is an opportunity to create some sort of platform to facilitate international collaboration. I don't think it's in our best interest that everyone moves back. We have a lot of great people abroad. They're doing amazing things. We should be able to transfer that knowledge better and more efficiently, and facilitate collaboration between Greek people here and Greek people in Greece. And the last thing that I'll leave you with, I'll try to leave you on a positive note, is that when we ask people unprompted what other factors are influencing your decision to move to Greece, 21% of people said that they want to give back. They said that I care about my country, I've learned things abroad, I want to move back, I want to mentor students, I want to help bring my research to Greece, I want to help improve Greek university. And I just think that this is a very positive message, and I hope we can find a way to help them so that they are able to actually give back to Greece. So thank you, and I think I'll call the panelists now to join me. Okay, unfortunately, Mr. Prevelakis couldn't be here today. But if Mr. Tsokos, could you join me? Thank you. And Yulia, if you could also join me. And Corina, I can hand you a few microphones.
Yeah, before we start the discussion, I want to congratulate you for this study. It's the first time I see data on this topic. And as everybody knows, data walk and talk flies, epipteroida.
Yes, I do. And I know that you have to. Yes. Firstly, thank you, everyone. I will introduce you as I ask you questions. I'll start with Mr. Yorgos Tsokos, who is a professor of medicine at the Harvard Medical School. And, one of the reasons why we wanted a doctor on this panel today is because, as you saw, 78% of them want to move back. Because he's a doctor, he has to leave quite soon. So I'm going to start with you and ask you a few questions so that you can go to your other duties. But I think I'll start with a simple question of why do you think doctors want to move back more than others?
Can I make a comment on your data? There's a big confounding factor, and that is the fact that the Greeks are sentimental people, and you ask them, you want to go back, first thing they're going to say, yes, I want to go back. The last 46 years in this country, every time somebody asks me, you want to come back? Yeah, sure, but I'm still here. Doctors are different from the other academics that you mentioned. And most of the academics I know, they don't go to work somewhere for big compensations. Compensation is the last item an academic will ever consider. What is most important is academic freedom and a place to work. And the reason this country has done so well is because of the academic freedom. Yes. In Greece, unfortunately, the climate is still very nepotistic and patriarchal, and in many ways nepotistic. Doctors, though, have the opportunity to go back and get a position in an institution or whatever kind of institution and have a private practice and make more than $4 or $50 or $7,000, much more. Some of them, the ones who return from the States, and they're very well trained, they become, particularly the surgeons, right? So it's not a concern for them. All they want is somewhere to anchor, be an associate or professor or assistant professor, whatever, in a university or a hospital, and then have a private practice and leave. So for them, it's much easier. Now, because there's flourishing, from what I understand, private practice in Greece, particularly in Athens. So this is a different kind. I would put the whole thing in a different sort of box, if you want. The problems that they face, from what I know, is the ever-present sclerotic bureaucratic. Like they have boards here, and they go back and they don't recognize them. And they force them to some kind of questions or exams and everything. And I understand, but they face these issues, but they manage to overcome. So this is the big difference for doctors. For the other academics, I think it is all the factors that you mentioned there are important. Giving back, giving back is very important. One of my former fellows was Dean of Medical School in Athens. And he was talking to me and everything. And I told him, I'm willing to fly there. I don't need a ticket. I don't need anything. I'll fly there to give lectures or whatever. Just make it in a way that is acceptable to everybody. And this dean was very close to me, and we have a very strong working relation. He was not able to do it at all. So you talk about all these options there. People have talked about this for years, and nothing ever happens. Why? Bureaucratic sclerosis in Greece, which has undergone cosmetic changes over the years, but nothing to write home about. Don't be fooled. So for the other academics, it is, you mentioned factors, but it is, from what I understand, and looking back at my and Maria's staying here, there are certain factors and there are certain points, inflection points in somebody's career will consider a change, right? As you know, in academia, you grow, you do a fellowship, That's everything wonderful. Then you need to get your first position, right? If you don't get your first position, you're locked out in this system at least, which is quite competitive and tough. You get at that point, you can make a decision where I'm going to go. You can go to industry. If you cannot make an academic institution, you consider going back to Greece. Then you finish, you get your first grant, right? And you start doing well somewhere. There's another huge bottleneck moving from a first grant to becoming an established investigator. It's huge, and where most of the people are cut, and what you see, the successful people who stay here, they manage to overcome that bottle. So at these two major bottlenecks in somebody's academic careers, and I know about biology, I know medicine, I know health sciences, I don't know about engineering or anything else, but I assume it's the same thing, same bottleneck to break them, to establish yourself. So at these points, if they have opportunities, they will consider going back. And actually, let me share with you some experience. I think it was 2015 where they established the university councils for the first time. 80% of the university professors, staff, and everything wanted them, overwhelmingly voted for them. They wanted them. And there was a minister, I forget the name, who made all these wonderful, we had a wonderful out of how we'll operate, what we'll be doing. And then we get started and we go there. We're going there and we had Zoom meetings also. And then as the time moved on, the people at the ministry, they started να το ξεφτιλίζουν λίγο. You know, just pull thread by thread by thread by thread. The people who made it, the people who made it. You say, you know, what's your memory like? Right. So, and then obviously the academics start realizing, say, no, we don't really want a council like that. And in 3 years, under my presidency, they were dissolved, and now there's a new form, which is, it's not a council, it's for the birds.
I think you just mentioned that you were on one of these councils. You were at the Council for the University of Athens.
And the president.
And the president. Yeah. And so you've seen the universities through a different angle. You haven't only seen them from outside, you've also seen them through this council. And so what do you think are some of the biggest challenges in universities today? I mean, we saw a long list of the challenges.
Let me tell you, when I was coming back, people were asking me, what's your experience? What do you see in Greece? I'll be a little bit cynical and say, I remembered why I left Greece the first time around, This was my impression. There was not that much has changed besides cosmetics. And we're talking about real changes that allow progress, that allow strong people to flourish. And again, salary for academics is not the major issue. It's not. It's the freedom to do what you want. I mean, Greek universities are not free, right? To hire a technician, you need a signature from the minister or his sub-minister, or his secretary, one of these people. They're not free. And Dimitri Bertsimas from MIT, who was the first president, I was the second, we're talking about that and trying to explain to people that we want to help you make the universities independent. It never happened. So the process for research was the same. The political and administrative shenanigans were practically the same. Did I want to give back? Yes. I mean, I made in 3 years probably 15 trips. They never paid one. I didn't ask. They had promised to pay, but I never asked. I never got anything, and I never asked for $1. Yeah. Thank God my sister was living there, and I could stay with her. So I'm not sure I answered your question, but this is.
Yes, but
I don't. I'm not pessimistic. I'm not Cassandric. If you were asking me, this is yes. I want to go back. You know, I mean, do I miss Greece? Yeah. I mean, the language, the poetry, the religion for some of us, the orthodoxy, the poetry, the logotechnia. You know, it's like every time I go to Greece, I pick up 15 books from. I mean, yes, of course we want to go back.
maybe because I am an optimist, was there something that you were able to do while you were on this council that was successful? And what was it about that made it actually successful? Because you're saying that you couldn't do many things. There's a lot of bureaucracy. It's very hard to go around it. But what were some of the successes, and how did you manage to actually do that?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. I don't think if I judge the way I judge myself in a rough way, tough way, I don't think we accomplished something that I can be proud of. Yes, we started certain things. We had a process to select the deans of the schools. But everybody was, and after we left, I mean, it's not happening anymore. Anyway, it is. It is though. I mean,
I failed. I will try one more time, and then I'll let you go to your appointment. Hopefully, this might be positive. Let's see. There's a lot of discussion right now in public discourse around.
Let me ask you before you go. You mentioned at the beginning that people are going back to Greece these days. Do you have numbers for that? Or is just impression?
The numbers are, I can quote you the latest number that I've seen, but I've seen a number that is 4,000, and I've also seen a number that's 300,000. So probably the truth is somewhere in that range.
No, real numbers like you did.
No, but these are real numbers. I've seen the number 3,000, and I've also seen the number 300,000 from, credible sources. So I cannot tell you what the truth is. I wish I could. But European migration numbers will tell you that it's 300,000. The ministry that gives people the rebates, because you are allowed a rebate if you move back to Greece if you've lived abroad for more than, you're allowed a 50% tax rebate if you move back. Those numbers say 3,500. So I don't know. It's 3.5 that the government's willing to pay rebates to. So that's the only thing that I can say.
I'm sorry.
No worries. I will. Let's see if this will be a positive or a negative answer. But one of the things that a lot of people are discussing in public discourse right now has to do with research, not just in Greece, but also globally. You're also an academic. There's a few academics in the room. There is concern about federal funding in the United States decreasing, and what implications that will have for funding in the United States. And I'm kind of wondering, is this an opportunity for Greece? Is this an opportunity for Europe? Do you see anything positive?
As you know, there is a big discussion about that. There's a European movement trying to convince people to come back. Nature Journal, 10 days ago, last Thursday, had an article. They asked 1,500 people, scientists in the United States, established, and 75% said that they want to go back. Other countries, I know China is extraordinarily aggressive in getting people back. Japan is doing the same thing. I don't know about other countries. I don't know to what extent Europe is serious about bringing back people. But Europe, the main countries, Germany, France, and so on, they send people here for a couple of years. They have positions going back. It's not the same problem, not the same issue as is with Greece. The same with Japan. Japan sends people out for 3 years or 2 years, 3 years. Frequently, they pay them, they get them back. It's a very well set up system in getting them back and getting the best out of this country. So there is a turmoil, or it looks like a turmoil right now in this country. There is an apparent in the news turbulence, obviously, but I don't think we know yet where is that going to settle, and it's premature to start making decisions and what does it mean. We don't know. I mean, I've been here 46 years. Spiros probably has been longer, I don't know. But every time that a government changes, there is a turmoil, always. I remember the Reagan years and later, reorientation, sort of like reprogramming and everything. So we still don't know. This is this is going to end. We don't know.
You said, though, that in careers, there are inflection points. So we don't know if we're at that inflection point right now, but we'll see. Only time will tell. But thank you for your time. I know that you have to go. I really appreciate it. I'll clap. Thank you. Had to change some things around. We are adaptable. So now I'm sorry if I mispronounce the name Yulia, because I can't see the accents in Greece, but Diamadi Karanou. Karanou, I'm sorry. And Corina Anagnostopoulou. Yuli is Associate Teaching Professor in International Affairs at Northeastern University. And she's actually done some research on the Greek diaspora. And I was very, very happy to be introduced to you. And I want to start something that you did a long time ago, which was that you documented Greek academics in the United States. So tell us a little bit about that. When was that? What was the information that you collected?
Yes, that was a very interesting project that actually was not part of my own academic research. And it was much earlier than my research for my dissertation. It was a project that was started by the Consulate General of Greece in Boston. I was working there at that time, and the press office. So the press office of the Greek consulate had launched this big project, research project, where it collected information on all the Greek academics, if possible, as many as we could find in the US. And this led to a production of a directory, of Hellenic Academic Community Directory, which included some very interesting information. It wasn't the type of research that we saw today. We didn't ask questions about their preferences and thoughts and so on. We basically identified them, and then we collected basic information for them. We kind of mapped the academic ecosystem, the Greek American academic ecosystem here in the US. So a few interesting findings from that were that we could identify, following a very thorough research, almost touching on every single university in the US, 900 Greek American academics in all different types of academic positions, from junior academics. We didn't include doctoral students, but we included postdocs and everything above that. So all different levels of academia, they were spread everywhere. So this is like echoing what you found. We are everywhere, like literally. And I think that by now my kids who are here have known this, like we find Greeks everywhere. Now, when it comes to academia, again, every single state in the US has Greek academics. Every single urban center in the US has Greek academics. And they are also in all disciplines. So we have representation across the academic world. Another finding that kind of echoes what you found here, and which shows that this is kind of a standard across time, because that was I don't think I mentioned the date, at around 2003, so about 20 something years ago. In terms of disciplines, the greatest concentration was the same: STEM, engineering, most of all among STEM, and medicine came very close, and then everything else. Among the other disciplines, business also concentrated quite a high number of academics, but again, everything was represented. So we see this tradition of Greeks going into Polytechnio and medicine, and we don't have as many lawyers here as in Greece, but it makes sense also because the Greek law system is different from the American one, so they tend to come less to study here. So these were some of the findings that have to do with the profile, the character of the academics. Also the fact that, and this opens a different discussion, that we included everyone who had something that looked like a Greek name to contact. That's how you identify, right? That's how you try to identify the people. Then when you receive a response back from them, you know for sure that it was indeed a Greek. Yeah? But other than that, unless they are already members of a Greek academic network or something, you can't tell. So it is a very painstaking, very thorough investigation into the last names of the people in the different universities. That's the starting point. And then they confirm that with you when they respond. Which means a number of things regarding the character and the profile of the Greek diaspora in general. This way we miss those who are children of mixed marriages and their last name is actually their father's last name, which is non-Greek. So there are even more potentially. And also this opens the whole conversation regarding what is a Greek diaspora, who is a member of the Greek diaspora. And this is a favorite topic of mine because that is what I did my dissertation on, the Greek American diaspora. And also I've been a member of the Greek American diaspora for 30 years now. So starting this conversation, which is something that you mentioned earlier, so it is not only the people that, of course, naturally we concentrate on, we're talking about bringing back. So that means that they left, and we're mostly concerned with those that left recently, and they are possibly the ones that are easiest to get back because it hasn't been that long since they left the country. But then if you kind of open up the kind of framework through which you, the frame through which you see the issue, we are talking about people who left much earlier, like Professor Tsokos 46 years ago, and many others here and all around. And even if we're really talking about diaspora, we go into these people that you mentioned who are of Greek origin, but they didn't live in Greece, they weren't born in Greece. And there we're talking about a much greater population, which is basically an untapped resource, but is also kind of very much connected to Greece emotionally. We can talk about even fourth generation Greek Americans, because Greek presence here has been more than 100 years old. So we really can talk about a very big population with a lot of different characteristics, because many of them are of mixed ethnic background, not only Greek, but nevertheless, what is a common element is this relatively strong, I mean, there is a spectrum, some have a stronger Greek identity, others maybe less so, but still they do feel connection to the country. And this idea of giving back is huge in the Greek American community. And we see evidence throughout the history of the community itself and up to this point that this is something that definitely Greece should draw from.
I think, yeah, one of the things that we try to do as an organization, because we focus so much on the diaspora, is try to figure out how do you even define the diaspora, right? We talk about homogeneous, we talk about apodemy, it hasn't been consistent, and even in the constitution, it's not well defined. So this is something that we're also thinking through as an organization, and every time we have conversations about the diaspora, we have to remind people that it's not just the people who just left. There's so many more other Greeks that we need to be tapping into, particularly if you take into consideration that we have a massive demographic problem. So this is, this untapped resource could also help the country in other ways. But I think I just want to take a moment to because you did this work 20 years ago, but I just want to take a snapshot of it and potentially ask Corina. Corina Anagnostopoulou helped write this report. She's currently a policy advisor in Massachusetts and an HKS grad, so welcome back, I guess. But I just wanted to ask you to, based on what Yuli said, what are some of the differences or similarities in the data from 20 years ago and how the Greek academic diaspora has evolved over the past 20 years or so?
Absolutely. A quick disclaimer on my background. I'm part of the panel, but I'm not looking at things through the lens of the academic diaspora. I'm not an academic, so I'm looking at it only through the data that we collected for this project. And Yuli, it's very interesting to have you here, having conducted a similar project before the big crisis, before our generation kind of left Greece in search of better things. So a few key points that I think we can see similarities and differences is one of them is the numbers you mentioned. You said, I think 900 people across the entire US and all
For the crisis.
before the crisis, of course, big disclaimer, and all the universities that this country has, which is a great amount. Our number was quite larger since we found around 1,000 Greek academics in only 48 universities in the US, because our sample was much larger, was a global sample. But when we look at how many US universities we focused on, the number was way bigger than that. Of course, the crisis has happened since your research, but that's important to note. Something else is that you mentioned that there's a big concentration in STEM. We saw that Aphrodite mentioned a lot of it, engineers, people in the natural sciences. We also had that as a big concentration, but we also saw kind of a balance when it came to social sciences, humanities, arts, which is something that maybe is a new thing. It is very prevalent, as we all know, in traditional Greek way of thinking that, you become an engineer or a lawyer or a doctor. So we kind of see some trends in accordance to that, but also maybe a new generation that's moving away from that as they become a second or third generation expat living in different countries in the US in this instance. And also, as the world moves forward, we try to break free of these kind of way of thinking. So this is a very interesting thing that we saw. Who would have expected so many Greeks are in the arts in academia in the US. And then you mentioned about giving back. I think that's something that we've all heard. Aphrodite mentioned it before, that it was kind of in conversation for as many years as the expat conversation and them being back to Greece has occurred. And having the actual data behind that is very important. And a key point is that when we ask the question, what other things impacted your decision on whether you would like to move to Greece or not, is that we didn't put that as an option. People wrote it in. We didn't have it in a drop-down menu that someone would select, oh, I want to give back to my country. They thought of it, they inputted it in, and it was such a trend that you saw the numbers before. It was overwhelming. So those are some key things.
Yeah, and I think Mr. Tsokos also mentioned that he was driven by that, and even in the councils that were created, a lot of people, that's one of the reasons why they joined. I think, Yuli, you mentioned some of the characteristics of the Greek diaspora more broadly, and I kind of wanted to ask you, since you've studied the diaspora in general, what are some of the things that you've seen that align with, how the academics also think? You are also an academic, so what can you tell us a little bit more about the Greek academic diaspora, the Greek diaspora in general, patterns that you see that are similar with the ones that we discussed, and also potential motivations for people to move back or barriers to people moving back?
To some extent, the difficulties and the driving factors for repatriation among the other types of professions are similar. It might not be research funding, but it is like professional conditions, for example. So in some ways, it is a similar experience, whether you're an academic or not. And also the emotional, the personal connection, the family connection is the same for everyone, regardless of the particular profession. So we see that there are these similarities, and then it has to do with the particular professional conditions of each person. We have a lot of entrepreneurs among the Greek American diaspora. Possibly for them, it is a little easier than securing a job in a particular sector to just go and start a business of their own, especially if they have family that has businesses back in Greece and they can kind of work in that sector. So there is a variety of conditions depending on the particular professional characteristics of people. But at the same time, we have seen a pattern of repatriation, but relatively small from the US, especially. And we tend to see it among the older ages, like retired professionals who don't have as much professional responsibilities here, or younger children and so on. and younger researchers. So once they finish their PhD, for example, when like there are different options to choose from, and given the very competitive climate in academia here as well, they open up and they are willing to consider any opportunities, including moving elsewhere, other countries, third countries, but definitely consider moving back to Greece if they find a postdoc or an junior academic position. And again, this is also an outcome of the competitive environment here in academia. And given the changes that are recently happening, we may see this be even more reinforced, like the fleeing of academics, especially younger ones. But the younger ones, we see them more easily kind of moving to Greece compared to those who have more established careers. Depending on the point where you are in your career, I think this is what Mr. Tsokos also mentioned, you see different decisions.
Yeah, I think our survey asked people, would you consider it? It wasn't, will you move? Because it's also very hard for academics. There has to be position for you to move. I think in other professions, it's much more easier for you to move. There's much more flexibility in the system. I think, we are in the United States and we talk a lot about the Greek academic diaspora in the United States, and you and Mr. Tsokos also shared your experience, but we actually did a global study. So I think it might be interesting to kind of think about what are the differences between what we saw in terms of the academic diaspora in Europe or anywhere else compared to the United States. Could you tell us, Corina, a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. A few things. First of all, people in the US were the biggest group of respondents to our survey. It was about 30% was the group that was in the US, and 40% of the universities we surveyed are located in the US. So they were quite a large amount of people, part of our sample, that are located here. So some key things that we could find that we saw. First of all, demographic-wise was age. We saw that they were older, the sample was older when they were located in the US. There are a few ways we could explain that. One big factor we should keep in mind is that European universities usually have their PhD students, postdocs, and researchers on the websites, whereas a lot of the US universities don't. So the way we found people for the survey was through university websites, directories. So there was a big discrepancy there.
Welcome, Nico.
Yeah, welcome, Mr. Prevelakis. In true Greek fashion.
Yes,
Thank you
absolutely.
for coming. So yeah, that was the difference in age. We also saw that a lot of them have really large research budgets compared to the other people we surveyed. About 25% of respondents from the US have a budget of $500,000. That, as we can all understand, is really hard to replicate going back to Greece for so many people. So that's something to keep in mind when we're examining the results. They also had the highest salary expectations, which also makes a lot of sense. A lot of them, around 60%, expected more than 7,500 euros a month pre-tax, which Aphrodite showed in the graph before. Something else that was interesting was that most of them want full-time positions, whereas when we saw Europeans that were surveyed, they were more open to kind of coming in for some guest lectures, visiting professorships. That might be due to the fact that they're located geographically closer to Greece, so they can pop in and out. Mr. Tsokos said that he flew 15 times to Greece within a year. That's obviously really hard and really expensive if you're located in the US. Who is going to take on that cost? Is it going to be the Greek state? Is it going to be the professor? Both options seem really difficult. So that was also very important. And the last point I want to make is that people from the US were very interested in the international acclaimed university campuses in Greece as to where they would like to work if they moved to the country. Obviously, there was great respect for the public universities, but that was their focus. So, for example, if Georgetown or Harvard or MIT opened a campus in Greece, that is where would be their first choice to work.
Thank you and welcome, Nico. Thank you for joining us. We had a change in the panel, but Nikos Prevelakis is the Associate Senior Lecturer on Social Studies and the Assistant Director at the Hellenic Studies Center here at Harvard. And thank you for hosting us. And, you I think it's interesting to have someone from, that studies Hellenic studies, because you clearly have much more relationships with Greece and you work more with Greek academics. And one of the things that we were kind of recommending in this survey is to increase collaboration amongst Greek academics abroad and Greek academics in Greece. So given your experience, how do you think we can do more of that across other disciplines as well?
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. And again, sorry for being late. I was stuck in actually a meeting with students that had to do with Greece. Right. So, but I see that that people are more late than because I see George.
George had to go because he's a doctor and he had a.
He says, but even more important thing. So look, you're right. Not that much in terms of what I'm studying, but in terms of my affiliation with Harvard Center for Hellenic Studies, I have the possibility and the chance of being in Greece often. The Consul General would say too often. And Harvard has a Center for Hellenic Studies, which is based in Washington and has an office in Greece. Christos Yiannopoulos, who's at the back here, is the managing director of that center in Greece, and he's here with us. And so that allows us, yes, to do lots of collaborations. The way the center was established, of course, its primary mission was Hellenic Studies. But then once it became a center in Greece, its mission became much broader. So it supports now basically any kind of activities that have to do with Harvard and not only Harvard. So that's about me. But it's true that gave me the opportunity to think not that much in terms of what it would take for me or for other people to return to Greece, because I know that's difficult, especially for people who are established here for a long time, have families, etc. But how to increase collaborations and either in terms of short stay or in terms of just exchange of ideas. So these kinds of centers, Harvard is not the only one who has such a center, are one possibility. The other thing, of course, is networks that develop here. So I was part of the center of the Circle for Hellenic, Circle of Hellenic Academics in Boston, which is one of them. There are other initiatives of that kind. France has done a lot of similar things, encouraging diaspora initiatives, the aim of which is to develop collaborations with the universities so that we can get this kind of exchange without bringing the people back. In fact, it might be, I think, better for a country like Greece to have people abroad and have them develop collaborations and sending students back and forth, rather than bringing them back necessarily and thus losing that presence abroad. These are some scattered thoughts. I mean, again.
Yes, of course. But I also kind of wanted to, I think our discussion we've talked about the Greek academic diaspora, but we've also talked about universities in Greece. And I kind of wanted to ask both of you, as academics, some of your thoughts about Greek universities and potential for improvements. The more specific, I think, the better, because the more likely it is that we can implement them. But I don't know if you have any thoughts on.
So I have not studied at a Greek university, so it's very hard for me to talk about things. My main, if you want, experience with Greek universities is I was on the assessment team of the School of Theology and Religious Studies in Thessaloniki. That's the only, and at the time I remember the main theme that we noticed is that, but that was 15 years ago, that there were not enough publications in English and not enough exchanges with international universities. And I know that this has changed since then. So the internationalization of Greek universities was one of the things that we pointed out. Again, I know that lots of effort have been done since then. I'm not sure I can say much more about Greek universities. You say it would be unfair not having taught or studied there. I think other people are more competent. I don't know, Julie, if you have
Julie has also
better things to say.
here, so I don't want to put you on the spot.
Yeah, well, I can follow up a little bit. Definitely, I want to stress the importance of collaborations, and they can take a lot of different forms, both collaboration among the diaspora members, the networks that you also mentioned, and collaboration with Greek public universities and also other non-public universities in Greece. An example of a collaboration that we are engaged in at Northeastern is that we are taking our students abroad to Greece over the summer, in a program that is led by faculty, Northeastern faculty. Actually, the program that I'm co-leading with another colleague who is also half Greek is taking the students to Thessaloniki and Athens to study Greek politics, history, and the other aspects. And this is a kind of short-term collaboration. We're collaborating with Aristotle University to run this program. So there are a lot of different forms that these collaborations can take. I do want to stress the importance of not only concentrating on trying to bring the scholars back, which of course is a goal and an understandable one, but also preserving the diaspora and the connections with the diaspora wherever the academic diaspora is, because there are a lot of advantages to the fact that we are currently here. We all stayed here, we didn't go back to Greece. That means that the Greek diaspora is present at Harvard, in Boston, at all the biggest universities, the biggest research centers. This is an advantage, strategic advantage that we don't want to lose, really. We want to preserve this access to all of these centers while connecting the members of the diaspora to each other and back to Greece. So this is definitely an asset that we should preserve. Now, talking about the Greek universities, I think as with any problem and any policy issues and so on, first you're trying to kind of map the problem and starting with the positives, because I know how optimistic you are. You want
Right.
and we have to be. There is always reason for being optimistic. So I guess kind of talking about a strategy that will change and improve the universities should start with kind of mapping the situation, seeing what works well, kind of find the assets, what is going well, trying to reinforce that, keep and reinforce that, and then try to identify the problem areas. The thing is that we're not going to say something particularly new, even if we go over the particular suggestions about problems that need to be fixed. And actually, I have a list here, which is a product also of conversations with other Greek academics and people who have gone through the Greek and American universities. But a lot of these issues have already been identified in the work that the different committees that many times were chaired and staffed by diaspora academics have identified and have proposed, and there have been policy recommendations. Now, thinking practically, we should try to find out why these didn't move forward. So what were the sticky points, and try to kind of undo those conditions that keep these policy recommendations, which we know what they are.
Should I ask you what you think are the sticky points, or?
Well, I guess people who are more inside the situation would be more able to answer this question. But definitely when we're talking about things that need to be changed, like the meritocracy system and the transparency in hiring and promotion, and even the financial aspect, which maybe for some is an issue, for others maybe not as much. These things have been mentioned before. The question is, what is it that is keeping the situation as it is and does not let us move forward with these problems and kind of fixing them once we have already kind of decided and agreed that they are problems. So I think further research into each of these aspects should be done. And of course, the research funding situation, the infrastructure for research, also the fact that many times in Greek universities that there isn't the academic support to apply for a grant and to then have the academic support to help you move forward with a grant-funded research project as it exists here. So those aspects. And then actually something that was mentioned to be by some friends in Greece was the fact that if you're at a Greek university and you make purchases for your research lab or whatever, you have to pay tax. And the tax is kind of high, like 24%. And here in the US, universities do not pay tax for purchases of items required for labs or anything else, because as nonprofit institutions, they are exempted from tax. This is a very specific thing that maybe it would be easier to remove enable kind of research projects to move forward. Maybe not.
I would love for it to be easy, but when you're talking about removing taxes in Greece,
Yeah.
it's,
See,
I think the hardest conversation of all after meritocracy. It's
Well,
the hardest conversation.
it's the whole taxation system here that allows all different kinds of nonprofit institutions not to be responsible for paying taxes. And of course, this enables these institutions to move forward with their mission, whatever this may be. So this is something that is an obstacle. And especially when you work in a field that requires a lot of purchases to run your research project, and then you have to choose between being in the US and being in Greece, and then having this added burden. In terms of the infrastructure, it's not only the research infrastructure, but for people who work and study here, it would be important to also be in places where the actual physical infrastructure is kind of comparable. Like we see where we are right now, okay? And the thing is that the physical infrastructure is always important. It influences you, it impacts you, your willingness to work, to study, to learn. And I cannot say that the infrastructure, if the physical infrastructure in Greek universities always allows you to be in that emotional situation where you have the kind of energy and the spirit to move forward with your academic studies, unlike what is happening here, which of course is something that requires money. But if we want to talk like seriously about kind of improving conditions, this is definitely something that should be kind of considered.
We're also in some of the best universities in the world. So it's hard to compete
Yes.
with funding with
So it doesn't
a
have
university
to
that has
be,
one of the
you know,
biggest
the
endowments.
nice environment that is here, but definitely smaller
Yes.
changes. And sometimes they don't even require funds. They don't even require money to kind of improve certain environments. And of course, with that goes also the whole safety issue.
Yeah.
This is something that, again, has impacted negatively students and professors at times in Greek universities.
I think I might try to wrap things up. We've been here for a while, but I want to, Nico, you want to say something? And then one last thing for Corina, and then
Two quick comments, if I can be heard. By the way, spoiler, we're in the same kind of group.
Yes,
so we've been
we asked
reading,
the same people.
and many of them
Shared
were
friends.
Harvard, right? Harvard
So-
graduates. These are our wise friends. We
Yeah.
asked for advice. And some of them have returned, and some of them have
Yes.
stayed here, and some of them have
These
have
are
returned.
insights from people who have also returned.
So two things. So obviously, what we get is coincides so well with what you found, right? The question of the nepotism, meritocracy, money, resources, bureaucracy, all the things that you found. One comment, number one, because you mentioned the difference between Europe being close and then the United States. There's also a difference between being the East Coast and being the West Coast, for instance, where. But it might work the opposite way. That is, if you are on the East Coast, you're not that far away. If you are in Los Angeles, you're further away. I think the incentive to go back might be bigger if you are further away and you don't have that possibility of being in Greece twice a year if you are on the East Coast. The other one is I'm thinking, the other difference is between universities like Harvard with huge endowments and resources and then smaller places. And then if you think in terms of salaries and quality of life, it's not that clear that being in a small university that doesn't have the resources of this one versus being in Greece is so much better. If you want to start a family, for instance, expenses are huge here. So there might be, I think it would make sense to see these categories differently. And if we want to bring people back, people who are in smaller universities with much fewer resources than this one might be easier to bring back. And these are wonderful people that would like to go back. Third comment is, as Yuli mentioned, the question of resources and possibilities for research and the kinds of environments that you have here. There are two ways of addressing this. Of course, the best would be for Greek universities to have similar kind of resources and money and create similar environments. A kind of intermediary solution would be to have funds that allow people to go back to the places where they've studied a couple of times a year and do this back and forth. And I know many people who would go back to Greece if they have the possibility to, for instance, return to Harvard couple of times a year for a week or so. So they keep the contact with the network here. They develop the research. They don't feel that they've cut ties completely, and they live in Greece. That would be perhaps good enough.
Yeah. And I like both of your last points, because it's things that, we had limited amount of time and a limited amount of money to do this survey. So we focused on 84 universities, and we focused on a lot of the big ones. So I think part of expanding this and moving forward could be to do this.
So maybe our results coincide because we also focused on graduates of big ones, right? So we might get different results.
Yeah. So I think that is very interesting, and I want to just build on that and just close on with one last question for Corina. This took us a very long time to do this survey. How do you think we can use a lot of this data? I actually saw someone quoting our report in a news article that was sent to me today. So that's fantastic that people are leveraging this information. But how do you think people can use this data? What can we do to moving forward? What's your perspective on that?
I wanted to make 2 quick points on the discussion we just had. Number one is we often talk about resources and funding in these conversations. And I want to argue that in societies like ours, sometimes culture change is harder than finding funds. And a lot of what we saw is people being upset or angry with issues of transparency and nepotism and policies that aren't fair. And that, in many cases, is harder to change and tackle than actually finding the resources and building the infrastructure. So that's something we always need to keep in mind when we're thinking about policies. And the second is something that, as I studied in a Greek university for my first degree, came to the US for my graduate degree here at HKS, something that I'm astounded by at how good American universities are is keeping in touch with their alumni. They build these insane relationships, they pull you back in, and that is, for donations, it is to help their current students, it is for many reasons. It is because they're proud of you and they see you as an investment. If we had that in some capacity in Greek universities, we could bridge that gap. We could do these collaborations because a lot of the students that are, for example, here in Boston studying at some of the top universities in the world come from Greek universities, from undergrad. They could help be the bridges and facilitate the synergies between here and Greece. And now to your question, Aphrodite. Obviously, we worked on this for a year, so you get too lost in the data sometimes. So we need to look at the big picture. I think that it is so important when you're trying to make policy to have the actual information about the people that the policy is going to impact. And this is the most important thing I think we get from this is that now we know how people feel that are impacted by this. We know who they are to some respect. We have some information about them. How can you create a policy if you don't know who you're creating the policy for? So I think that will be an invaluable tool if it's used correctly by the people that can use it and can craft the policies. It can be used to raise awareness about things like tax incentives and name shares and other things that do exist but are not well known. It can be used as a platform to bring people together and bridge collaboration. It can help academics that are working abroad and want to stay abroad, as you both mentioned, to share their knowledge with their counterparts that are in Greece. We don't need to move everybody. People can share knowledge, and that's super important. So I think it is a great tool for people. And the last point I want to make, because I know Professor Tsokos was explaining his frustration being part of some solutions that didn't end up materializing, is that when you're in the world of policy, education policy is maybe one of the hardest ones because everyone is invested. Everyone goes through an education system, and you need so many years, sometimes generations, for a policy to actually get roots and make the changes that you want to make. It's hard when you change administrations and policies get taken down. You don't get to see the fruit of that policy if you don't give it enough years to materialize and don't give enough years for the culture change that is needed for the education policy. So I think we need to focus on long-term results with this and any policy in education. So hopefully that gives you the positive note you're looking for.
But I want to make two last comments just to say that I agree with your point on culture change. And I think, one of the things that we've tried to do with universities in Greece is that we're trying to promote policies that will support culture change. And this is why we've worked towards like strengthening institutions like the visiting professor or joint chairs, which bring people from abroad that have a different perception on how the universities will work. And I think, our approach is if you bring people who think differently, you can start changing the mentality from this inside out. You just need to hit critical mass, which has been hard historically, but we're trying to find ways to do that more effectively, because as we heard from Mr. Tsokos, it's very hard to do things top down in Greek universities. And, this is something that we all know. And the last point, I think I made a joke about the taxes, but I actually really like your point that because Deon is a nonprofit in the United States, and we see how functional it is to be a nonprofit in the United States and the tax benefits that you get. And when we start thinking about what those implications would be for us if we were in Greece, it's a very different, very, very different setup. I think the culture of nonprofits is very different in Greece and it doesn't exist. And I think this is something that we are working on as well to try to figure out how to help Greek culture be more receptive to nonprofits, and Greek tax law be more beneficial for nonprofits and have more transparency also in nonprofits. This is a negative note. We can end on Corina's note. You can scratch my last. But thank you very much.